The kids have all transitioned. Brother John, it is up to you. FY for my wife, teens will stay in service. Teens will stay in service.
Good morning. Am I coming through? I'm 66 years old. Well, I'll be 66 years old in a few weeks. And I still haven't got it sorted on how gracious God is just to me, you know. And I haven't suffered a loss like that, brother, but I know how angry I can get at unjust things, and never mind revenge. I think of things worse than that. But you're right, and we're going to see some of that grace as we look at Samson today. And I maybe this is why you're helping me see. This was a hard one for me. Preparing for this week. I don't know exactly why, but sometimes Samson raises more questions than he does answers. But there's no doubt about the grace of God in his life. A few trivia things as we get into it. Samson is not an unknown character in our culture. Rather, probably another thing that shows what his life was like, that our culture has a certain fascination with him. Okay, I Googled this and found out there's about 14, depending how you define them, there's about 14 or 15 different movies out there about Samson and Delilah. I've seen some old Hercules movies, and there's a few of them where Samson shows up as a guest. First him and Hercules are like this, then they become allies, and we have a fascination with this guy, and it impressed on me the importance of really knowing the record of what the Scripture says about this man. And perhaps one of the reasons I didn't enjoy this study so much is that men, if we're honest, there's more of Samson in us than we like to admit. Another thing here, there's an opera too. In fact, it's a very common opera, often played, Samson and Delilah. And though I've never seen it, I hope to one day. I am familiar with some of the music to it. And I guarantee you've heard some of the music from it, if not in a commercial somewhere. So again, Samson, we need to know the reality of him. Another thing that was a little bit of trivia here is we're dealing with the Philistines here. And does anybody know, actually you do, you don't realize it, but what is the Roman Latin word for Philistine? The Latin that the Romans spoke. Palestine. Yeah, Palestine. As I understand it, the Romans called that region Palestine after they destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and scattered the Jewish people, kind of as an insult to them. They were calling it Philistia. They were calling that whole region the land of the Philistines. And the Latin word for that is Palestine. Interesting. So, last week as Deacon started this off, I couldn't help it. Maybe I've been a teacher too long. But Samson, get her for me because she looks good to me. And they're trying to argue him out of this. And nope, this is what I want. And I couldn't help thinking, what was it like to raise this kid? I think I'll ask Manoah and his wife that when I get to heaven. You must have been some patient people. Because right from the beginning, you see a strong will there. But And this verse, I'm going to go back and quote this verse because this has a bearing on just about everything you're going to see in Samson's life. It was of the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. I think this is the guiding principle of everything that we're seeing Samson do in his life. John MacArthur kind of quantifies it this way. The Lord would supervise, manage Samson's selfish choices to secure Israel's deliverance and ensure the Philistines' demise. I like that word superintend, supervise, manage. Okay? This is something God had to do. Samson wasn't in control of himself more often than not, but God was. Okay? God was. I'm going to read from chapter 5 through 21, or actually 20, I'm sorry, at this time, and we'll look at this passage. And we're in Judges chapter 14, starting at verse 5. Then Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother and came as far as the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came roaring toward him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, so that he tore him as one tears a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. But he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. So he went down and talked to the woman, and she looked good to Samson. When he returned later to take her, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the body of the lion. So he scraped the honey into his hands and went on, eating as he went. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they ate it. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey out of the body of the lion. Then his father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there, for the young men customarily did this. When they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. Then Samson said to them, "Let me now propound a riddle to you. If you will indeed tell it to me within 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes. But if you are unable to tell me, then you shall give me 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes." And they said to him, "Propound your riddle, that we may hear it." So he said to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet." But they could not tell the riddle in 3 days. Then it came about on the 4th day that they said to Samson's wife, "Entice your husband, so that he will tell us the riddle, or we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us to impoverish us? Is this not so?" Samson's wife wept before him and said, "You only hate me. You do not love me. You have propounded a riddle to the sons of my people and have not told it to me." And he said to her, "Behold, I have not told it to my mother and father, so should I tell you?" However, she wept before him 7 days while their feast lasted. Some party, huh? And on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him so hard, she then told the riddle to the sons of her people. So the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" And he, that is Samson, said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of them, and took their spoil, and gave the changes of the clothes to those who told the riddle. And his anger burned, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his friend. A couple of you have already heard me quote this before, Chuck Swindoll. You know who Chuck Swindoll is? He's kind of been a while, radio preacher. I think he summed it up best when he said that Samson was a he-man with a she weakness. Okay. I think in this chapter, it's easy. I want to be careful not to draw some conclusions too strongly because we've still got a lot more of Samson's story to go. And I don't want to overstate some things, or some things to be overstated, perhaps you say. But I'd say mostly in this chapter, we're gaining some character insights into Samson. That this man, in some ways, is more complex than what Hollywood certainly shows him to be, and what sometimes even we believers think. Okay? He went down to Timnah, as far as the vineyards of Timnah, and I had a little flag when I read vineyards, you know. As you, I'm sure, remember that one of the things that Nazarites, which Samson was, he was supposed to be under the vows of a Nazarite, no wine or anything that has to do with grapes for that matter. He got as far as the vineyards, and a lion came roaring toward him. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily. Now, as you know, we've had that phrase, the Spirit of the Lord came upon a guy, Gideon, Othniel, others. But here's the first place in Judges where we have that word mightily. And it literally means to push forward, to prosper, succeed, advance, or thrive. One translation has the word rushing. The Spirit just came rushing in onto him in an intensity, okay? Different, apparently, than it did with Gideon and Othniel. Not any less potent, but I guess appropriate for that situation. It's so strong that he tore the lion as one tears a young goat. I don't want to go into how they tear the young, they talk about a young goat, a kid, or a goat's not mature. It's kind of brutal, so I won't go into it. But instead of it being a small goat that one man can handle, it's got a full-grown lion that he does it to. Now that's some strength. Okay, so we're getting a measure here at the beginning of Samson's life on how much strength he can exert, especially under the power of the Holy Spirit. And it came with a special intensity, but you've got to remember that it was the Spirit of the Lord that came upon him. Okay? And also, something that's interesting here is the parents were not there, and he didn't tell them about it. Okay? He did not tell his mother and father what he'd done. Okay? And I'm thinking, you know, I'm aware of cases like people being attacked by a bear on this continent or something, and some people have successfully beaten them off with a big stick or something. You know, and if Samson's that strong, why doesn't he just smack that lion down and let it go? You know, he, not only did he kill it, he took it apart. You know, I mean, that's pretty harsh. And coming from the Spirit of the Lord. Okay? And it goes back to verse 4. It was of the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. This lion has a role to play in influencing, shall we say, Samson into a certain direction and series of actions. Okay? So I have here the lion, as well as the good-looking woman, was sent by God to precipitate, that is to cause, the violence to come through Samson upon the Philistines. Okay? And there would also be, this situation also provided some material for him to be a little literary with, okay, as we know. In verse 7 it says he went down and talked to the woman, and she looked good to Samson. This was the first time he talked to her. Okay? So this brings this out a little bit more. Not like this never happens today, right? She's beautiful. I'm going to marry her. Or vice versa. Boy, he's handsome. I'm going to marry him. He's the guy I'm going after. Haven't spoken a word to him. Don't know anything about him. Okay? And this is what Samson had done. And even as he's talking to her, getting to know her, she looked good to Samson. It isn't just that, you know, he got to know her and was satisfied with what he was knowing. The emphasis is still here on appearance. It literally says she pleased well the eye of Samson. Okay? That word look good can refer to something being straight, even, pleasant, look the way it's supposed to be. Not just necessarily how it looks, but it's built or put together the right way. Okay? If it's a house or car or something you're putting together. Right? And here, the emphasis is on the eye. Again, we're getting a real emphasis on Samson's struggles, perhaps we could say, with lust. Though it doesn't seem like he struggled with it that much. Okay? That he was physically interested in this woman can't be ignored. His lust was dominating his action in this area. And this is, as we know, a consistent character issue with him. So in verse 8, when he returned later to take her, I guess to come to the wedding, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion. And behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the body of the lion. Would you want to eat honey out of a dead lion's body? I tell you, I wondered about this, just like, wow. Well, there is an explanation. It can get hot enough in that part of the world where decay doesn't even have time to take place. The corpse or body, whatever animal it is that dies, can dry so quickly that it becomes mummified. This is something that really happens, even today in parts of Arabia and in extremely hot parts of the world. And apparently this is what happened here. This is a little bit of a side note. But the bees found a nice place like they would in a hollow of a tree or a cleft of a rock, and oh, he kind of did cleave that lion, so now he's got a place for the honeybees. So, I also bring this up a little bit because this was a dead body. And as I think you remember, one of the things the Nazarites are supposed to do is stay away from dead bodies. Not just not touch it, but there's got to keep a distance. Even if it's the death of their mother or their father, or their son, their daughter, their brother, their sister, whatever. You know, I guess you could go to the funeral as long as you keep your distance, but no, you don't handle it. Now, one person tried to defend Samson in this case by saying that, well, you know, does that mean you become a vegetarian when you're a Nazarite? That's a good point. Yeah, you can get technical. You're eating a dead body, okay? But I think that's really taking things kind of extreme. Because he didn't tell anybody that he ate honey out of the body of the lion. And I think this suggests he didn't tell anyone because he knew he was transgressing. Yes, I think that Samson here broke his vow. Wouldn't be the last time. Again, a little bit into looking at what kind of person this Samson is. Verse 10, his father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there for the young men. Okay? And when they saw him, they being the in-laws, I believe, the wife's to-be's family, when they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. Okay? Kind of a big bachelor party? I don't know. But one thing is for sure, these young men were Philistines. They were not Israelites. And I'm sure that there was some drinking going on there. Some drinking. Okay? And while the text doesn't say it, it's not unreasonable to assume that Samson probably partook in that as well. Another breaking of his vow. Okay? And in the process of this, Samson said to them in verse 12, "Let me propound a riddle to you." And we know the riddle. And he made a bet with them. Okay? 30 linen wraps and changes of clothes. And this was a really expensive bet. Maybe by this time Samson had too much to drink. Okay? Or perhaps it was just his ego. Okay? He's trying to control and manipulate the situation and be the top dog in the situation with these other 30 guys. Never see that happen, do we? Okay. And he proposed this riddle. And in an ancient Near Eastern culture, riddles and enigmatic sayings were a common form of entertainment. They didn't have any video screens. So thinking about interacting with words and things like that was very important to them. So that proposing a riddle itself wasn't such a bad thing. But that bet, boy, that was pushing it. And the Philistine men, in verse 13, they took the bet. Propound your riddle, propound your riddle, that we may know it. And he said, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. But they couldn't tell the riddle. Now, a lion attacks Samson. He kills it. A honeycomb in there. And this is where I still struggle, okay? God is no doubt using this to manipulate, influence, supervise, superintend, however you choose your word, to superintend Samson to do what he's supposed to be doing. But that doesn't excuse Samson from touching a dead body. It doesn't excuse Samson. Okay? And I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but does God ever have to manipulate us? Does God ever have to superintend us? I know I've looked back on things I've done. I should have done that. But boy, it sure worked out well. That was God superintending me, my sin. Okay, but I'm still responsible for that sin. Okay, and so, and then the other thing too here is that we get another insight because, as I said before, the death of the lion was kind of like material for him to create a riddle. Kind of a clever little riddle, okay? And that came out of Samson's head, and so this man was not simply a guy of brute physical strength, okay? But he also was intelligent, literate, okay? Artistically creative, especially within that culture, okay? So it seems like here was a man who had it all. You know, he just wasn't some big, strong brute. He had a mind. And would that mind had pondered more on God's prerogatives instead of being used to get what he wanted. And in verse 15, here we come on the fourth day that he said to Samson's wife, entice your husband. Tell us the riddle, or we're going to burn you and your father's house down. Okay? Quite a savage little deal they're proposing here. Okay? One commentator suggested, and I tend to agree with this, that this was kind of in line with the nature of Philistine society at that time. You're getting a little insight here to how brutal the Philistines could be, even to their own people. Okay? They weren't threatening him, they were threatening her. Okay? And there's probably some pride here as well, too. Because we want to look like we figured this out. Yeah, we could go to him and beat him up and whatever. Little did they know, but that's an option, you know, they can go threaten him, but no, they want to manipulate the situation so their egos are intact and we can stand here and say, we're smart, we know your riddle, okay? The egos, okay? Doesn't sound too uncommon, huh, guys? Okay? And so, yeah, I put down here also they were practiced oppressors. They were oppressors of the the Israeli people at this time. And besides that, they accused her and her father of setting them up for a big loss. And so Samson's wife wept before him. Talk about God manipulating. Now she's trying to manipulate him. Okay? And you do not love me, you hate me, on and on. Interesting thing about this word love, that it can include the Greek concepts of both agape and phileo. You know, agape, where it's totally your decision, you're going to love somebody no matter what. Phileo is more the brotherly love. I like you, we get along, that kind of love. This word here can include both of those, okay? And hate means to detest, to be hostile to, okay? And, but you've not told me, you've not brought me into your confidence. You must not love me, okay? And his response is interesting to me. I've not told it to my father or mother, so should I tell you? Okay? Apparently there was not enough of a relationship here for her to trust her husband. First of all, to tell him, I've been threatened. They're threatening this if you don't tell me. To be totally honest with him and share with him, okay? And he didn't have enough of a relationship where he'd reached that point where he's going to tell her things he wouldn't tell her parents. We all do that, right? Wife, husband, whatever, you know. We reach a point in that relationship, not necessarily sometimes before we're married, where we are trusting them with things we might not tell our parents. Well, they hadn't reached that point here, okay? And to me, there's a little bit of a, should I say reciprocity? A little bit of Samson harvesting what he's sown, reaping what he's sown. Okay? He's gone after this in a very physical way, and the emotional, rational, loving part isn't there. Okay. Of course, there's another thing here too. In seeking your husband's protection, to be fair about it, what could one Israelite do? Well, they're going to find out. Okay? And so she was after him for 7 days, in verse 17, and finally he told her, and she went right away and told the riddle. Okay? Now, we know the story of Samson, and already we're seeing a pattern begin here, where he gives the woman some power over him to defeat him. Okay. Though in this case, it spurred him on to do something that apparently God wanted. Okay. So the men of the city on the seventh day said, what is sweeter than honey? What's stronger than a lion? He says, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. Plowed with my heifer is not an uncommon term, I understand, for those times. It was somewhat derogatory. We'd find it very derogatory today. But it's a way of saying she was nothing but a tool for these men to dig up a secret, like a livestock pulling a plow. Okay? And I'd say also that Samson, being as smart as he was, gained some sad insight to how much trust there was or was not between him and his wife. Okay? There was something that could have warned him, but I don't know if he learned from it. And then verse 19, again we have this phrase, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily. And he went down to Ashkelon, I understand it was 23 miles away, and killed 30 of them, Philistines, took their spoil and gave the change of clothes to those who told the riddle. Came back to these three guys and says, okay, here's your bet. Okay? And his anger burned and he went to his father's house. He didn't stay. He didn't stay apparently for a wedding ceremony or consummation of it, something that we would see. But he went back home to sulk, to let his anger burn, whatever. He did this killing in the Spirit of the Lord. Okay? And I don't know, I mean, this could be debated if he necessarily broke his vow there. I mean, he didn't touch the dead bodies, he made the dead bodies. You know, as gruesome as that is. Okay? I don't know if there's anything in the Nazirite vows that precluded them from taking the sword. Yeah, you liking that back there? Yeah. But he did have to handle them to get their clothes off. Okay? Okay. And probably went down to Ashkelon, maybe because it was a populated area. There was probably nothing in Timnah. Or maybe he went somewhere where the news wouldn't get around very fast. Didn't have the internet back then, you know. Word of mouth would have given him some time. And I wonder too, what was the reaction of the 30 men when he's giving them this clothes? Was some of it bloodstained? Were some of them wondering where it came? Maybe by then some of them have heard about what had happened. Okay? And I think that they would not have been impressed, they would have been alarmed. And there's a beginning here, okay? A beginning of God's judgment on Philistia. Whatever the ins and outs were, whatever Samson's sins may have been, God is starting to deal with Philistia, with the Philistines, okay? Remember, as it said in verse 4, it was of the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. That does not exonerate Samson from his excesses, from his sins. Okay. His violence and killing was in response to the threats of violence and murder from the 30. In a sense, there was some justice here. The Philistines, in some sense, initiated when they threatened his wife to be, we're going to burn you and your house down if you don't tell us. Okay. If they hadn't done that, you know, so there is a kind of a justice here that the Philistines did bring to themselves. And here we have the start of God's judgment on this brutal, oppressive Philistine society. Okay? Done in the power of the Spirit of the Lord. There's no sin on God in this. He is as immaculate as ever. Okay? And it says in verse 20, Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his friend. Probably father decided he didn't want his wife to marry a murderer of 30 men. Of course, now Samson's a marked man, as we're going to see in next chapters. Okay. And so the story of Samson here has just begun, and we can draw some thoughts and conclusions. First of all, I got a few points here. Samson, Nazirite from the womb, a man of faith mentioned in Hebrews 11, yet there's no contradiction that he's an example of how far the leadership in the days of the judges has fallen. We brought this out before, how things just keep getting worse, and even the quality of the judges suffers more and more and more. So we've got this super strong man who's really more interested in pleasing himself. Okay? And I can't read my writing here. God reached a point where now he's superintending this selfish nature to get his agenda accomplished, okay? And so this downward spiral is proceeding, and we see this in this judge of Israel. Another factor here is seeing how sin corrupts. It's almost as if each time Israel sinned, they went further into sin and never quite came back as far. Okay? A culture loosens up, shall we say? And it's been said here before from this pulpit, what one generation tolerates in moderation, the next generation will practice in excess. We don't see that happening, do we? Okay? And there's a corruption here, and I can't help, not to make excuses again for Samson or any of the judges, but how much are they conforming to the cultural thinking? How much are we conforming to the cultural thinking? Okay? Also, I think you'll agree that Samson, and we could go a long time on this one, I won't, but Samson is a picture of wasted potential. Okay? He was smart, he was strong. One commentator suggested, I don't know if I agree with this, but one commentator suggested that Samson could have been an amazing military leader if he had decided to organize an army to go after the Philistines. Now, I don't know if that's what he was supposed to do. You know, I'd like to talk more with some of you about that, but that was suggested. That could be an illustration of it, but I don't think you need to go that far to see that there was wasted potential here. Have you ever stopped to reflect on your potential? Have I met my potential? When I do, it's by the grace of God. Only by the grace of God. And I touched on this, an abundance of strengths and talents can bring with it an abundance of temptations and pitfalls. Okay? We in our culture, for one thing, I put this down, I'll just read what I wrote. Do we in our culture excessively value and or idolize worship? Superior strength, talent, ability, whatever it is. It still amazes me to watch some football games and see the fans' reaction. No matter what team it is, without going with whether it's a red jersey or green jersey, whatever. But to see some of these fans breaking down when their team loses. You know, maybe if you were a parent and your kid was playing, okay, but wow. How much are we a part of the problem here? Okay? In worshiping strength and intelligence, and whether it's a Hollywood actor, you know, and there's some actors out there, I hate their politics, but I'll watch their movies because they're good at what they do. Okay? But we practically worship these people. You know, are we part of the problem? A part of the cultural spiral down? Okay? And here's another thing. I'm starting to get to my final point here, but this is not quite it. Powerful men have powerful desires. And powerful men need to find a powerful source to bring them under control. The Lord Jesus Christ. Salvation only through him. And that salvation saving you from yourself, in a manner of speaking. I think you know what I mean. Okay? And I've seen this, I'm sure you've seen it. It's cultural refinement. You can have a real gentleman in front of you. It does not mean that they are devoid of common vulgarities, you know, or corrupt tendencies. Okay? In fact, some of your most refined people can be some of your most corrupt. Okay? The outward. And the last point I put down here, this is going to get a little meddlesome, is there are no perfect candidates, Americans. Democrat or Republican. I'm going to offend all of you here. Okay? I tried to find this comic I have somewhere at home, but I couldn't find it. But there's this scene. And this, I read this years ago, and it hit me right between the eyes. There's this guest who's a pastor, and he's staying at this home for a few days. And in this one clip, the host is sitting down, reading a newspaper, and he's angry. And the guest, the godly pastor, comes in, just as he looks up and says, "Can you believe this guy is doing things so stupid? Okay? how did this guy ever get to be president? How? And the pastor says to him, you mean the Lord's anointed? Would he be there if God didn't want it? Oh, Democrat or Republican, oh, independent, okay? That was something that made me start to pray for presidents, no matter who they were. Okay. The man that's in there, if it's Joe or Donald or Hillary or Bill or Ron or George or Barack or who have you, they would not be there if God didn't want it. Or you go and vote for who you think God's convicted you to vote for. But when the election's done, have peace. Okay? Because if God can use a man like Samson to achieve his goals, to achieve his plan, do you think God's plan is being hindered by a Democrat or a Republican? No. His plan is still going to be fulfilled by these imperfect people that are in charge. Okay. I think we know this. Just need to remind that. If God could use Samson, think about that next time you're frustrated with our leaders. Okay. And despite his flaws, Samson was a man of faith used of God. After all, it was of the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. The Lord superintended. The Lord superintends now, whether it's the mayor or the president or whatever it is. Okay. Of course, this does not excuse his weakness, Samson's willful excesses. How much does God have to superintend you? How much does he have to superintend me? We know ourselves. We know the secret sins. We know the things that we should have done. But is there a point, I don't know how to put this, but there's a point, I think, where either we're being like Samson, okay, where whatever good is being accomplished in our life is in spite of it, in spite of ourselves, okay? That's a pretty miserable place for a believer to be, by the way. I've seen that before. I think you can know. But how quick are you to come to God with confession of sin? How quick are you to share with others? That's a hard one, sharing our weaknesses with one another. Seems there's a verse that says to do that, right? Okay. Remembering at the same time that, we have the prophecies, we have Daniel, we have Revelation, we know what's going to happen, we know what's coming, and nothing is going to thwart God's plan. Okay. Nothing's going to do that. And we can be a harmonious part of that plan or a superintended part of that plan. It's up to you. It's up to us. It's up to me. Brother, worship team, sorry.